All right. Well, welcome back to Michelle and Nikki's Performance Playbook. We are going to talk about tapering today and what tapering is, what it isn't. How do we experience there can be a bit of magic to taper and taper performances and like what comes out of that. And then sometimes there's not. And so I'm just going to start with a little story. Most of you know, if you've been listening, I was coaching a high school swim team this past year. And about 2 weeks before our championship meets, the kids started asking me questions like, what is taper? And they all want to know, what is taper? And some of them really like only had me as the coach for the high school season, but others of the kids like were swimming on a year-round age group team. And so in that scenario, they have different coaches. And what's interesting is the different coaches have different perspectives on taper, right? So
Mhm,
like
mhm.
one kid on the team said like, yeah, our other coach doesn't believe in taper. And I'm like,
Hmm,
that's
okay.
it, that's a belief and it's possible, right? And depending on the circumstances. So I told him, all right, I'll tell you like what, like my stance on taper is that taper is like a resting thing that we do, or like a reduction in volume, an increase or an increase in intensity, but like a stabilization of the intensity that you're doing, but we're reducing volumes, keep frequency, keep intensity, reduce volume. Those are the big picture concepts, like in a way that allows you to go into your competition feeling fresh, feeling rested, feeling extra peppy, and therefore able to perform better than you ever have before. And what I told them, I'm like, here's the thing. In order to have that happen and to have it be called taper, you have to have something to taper from.
Mhm.
And what I meant by that is that like if in the case of like that high school swim team, the ones that weren't practicing with the club team. They were only practicing with the high school swim team. We were swimming like 3 times a week for about an hour, maybe an hour
Yeah.
15 total. Right. So like they never did more than 3,000 meters like in a workout. So like they were never even hitting 10,000 a week. And so I was very honest with them, like as I'm giving this talk on taper, and they were all like sitting on the edge of their seats. Like, what does taper look like, coach? I'm like, well, we're still going to reduce volume some, but we're not going to reduce it a lot because like the reality is we have not done enough physical work
Mhm.
to stimulate what would be like the super compensation that you would need in order to have a full taper effect. So that doesn't mean that we don't rest going into the bigger meets. But what I think you can't do is expect like a super compensation taper effect where you have this magic day that came out of nowhere that you were like, oh my God, I didn't even know I was capable of doing that thing. Cause like, there are experiences and I have had one. And if we
Oh,
want
yeah.
to talk
Yeah.
about like the magic of the breakthrough day, I can lead everybody straight through like what the 6 months before that looked like. But this is what I'll say, like if your training block has been short, like 3 or 4 months at a time, if your total training volume has never been super high or like high enough to the point where you're like, wow, like I'm really tired right now, and you weren't backing up days like that, then your taper is not going to be a thing that allows you to like race in a mind-blowing way that where you surprise yourself. Your best hope in that scenario is that you rest going into the race so that you can still get the very most out of yourself on the day, but it's still going to be very largely like within the capacity that you had to perform kind of like on a good training day. Right. And like that's about as much as we can hope for. And the reality is that in order for it to be a taper where you have a peak performance,
Mhm.
what you can't be doing is racing like every other weekend for 4 months leading
Right.
into that race, right? Like, so like the only way that a taper works is if you're like, I planned out a 6 to 9 month training progression, right? Where like I learned how to train and then I trained to train and then I did the peak training that was specific to the race. And at times I was really tired. And then I started shedding this blanket of fatigue that I've been carrying around with me that I had learned to manage myself like under this blanket of fatigue. And then I learned to manage that. And then I rest on top of that. And then you have a good mindset and you're happy and you're well fueled and you do all the things right, like logistically leading into the race. That's where you go, oh my God, I dropped a half an hour. That was
Yeah,
I had no idea that like that performance was in me. That was amazing. That's where the magic is, but it only happens largely depending on what you have done leading into the taper. So like I just wanted to preface this whole conversation with that because taper and rushing into a race in the 2 weeks before the race can look identical, but the outcome will look very different depending on how what the whole like 6 months looked like before that.
absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's there are some techniques that I think I've learned that can work with different athletes, but it really depends on what that athlete has put in, in the yes. And it's 6 to 9 months really. That's eh, as we've talked about in the last couple of podcasts on a lot of times what we're seeing now is that athletes come back to us or come to us, right, and say, "Oh, I've got a race in 3 months. Can you get me ready?" It's like in that situation, the taper is really just a rest. I do think that the longer the race, like if we're talking about doing Leadville 100-mile ultras, Ironman, like it is important well, it's important at any race distance, but I think it's even more important the longer the race distance is to have some rest going in. I'm thinking back to my high school days, right, of track. I don't really remember like tapering for a state meet, even though but I know that we did like progression through the season and we were doing different styles of work. But as high schoolers, God, we recovered so quickly that I think we probably just did, instead of doing like 2400s, we do like 15, like all out, and then like 2 days before the state
Yeah.
meet, um, because that's just, and I'm sure you saw that with your high schoolers too. Like the recovery time is just insane.
Hmm.
But there's still something to be said for even the youth categories to give them a little bit of rest so that they can perform really well. But yeah, I absolutely agree, and I do feel, and my athletes are listening. I have a handful here and there that will go through a more traditional build into their A race, and then we do a true taper. But even when we do that, the magic component is still really like important, right? Like there's some art, there's a little bit of science, and whether or not it really allows the athlete to go above and beyond what we thought was capable. It's pretty rare, I think, even
Have you
in
ever
my
had an experience, like personally
yeah,
yourself, an
yeah,
experience where you were like, "Oh my God, that was amazing." Like you had like an incredible race that it's like it feels like it came out of nowhere, but it clearly didn't come out of nowhere. Like you had earned it, but you still surprised yourself. Like tell us about that.
yeah.
Like you tell
I
your
mean,
story, I'll tell my story, and we'll
yeah.
look at what is like in common.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of my Ironman race performances, I was resting before the race and not tapering because I was juggling science career, coaching career, right? I often, I think I've said on this podcast, like I did just enough to get by. And I think my race performances I always drained the bucket, right? But it was not, I did not give myself the training to really get the breakthroughs. I mean, I was very steady across the board. I think my first Ironman was about like 12 hours. And I think most of them were around like 11:15 to 11:30, which is, that was fine. It was decent. Top 20, top 15. Uh, when I had a breakthrough race though, I took an hour and 10 minutes off. So I went about 10, I think it was 10:30. I think my fastest time at that time, I think my fastest Ironman was about 11:30. Um, but what had happened up until that point, and actually, I will say this that my taper actually wasn't great because I had some personal life stuff going on. The short of it is, my coach went through a really hard time and left, and kind of left me out to develop my own race plan. And it was all fine, right? Like this was Ironman number, I think, 10 for me. So it wasn't like I was new to the sport. But I digress a little bit. The lead up to that race, though, is where, I mean, I put in I think this is the training block where I think I hit like 40 hours of training or something like that, right? Like a huge, huge training, which is what I needed to force the adaptations to get the super compensation, right? To be able to have that breakthrough race. So yeah, it was definitely, I would actually even say the taper was kind of a shit show, to be honest, but I'd rested enough and by that time I'd also known that I needed a little bit even above Ironman intensity in the week or two leading up, but much lower volume to really feel like I was on, right? Like feel like everything neuromuscularly was firing. And that took a few go rounds to figure that I did well on that to add in some more intensity in the weeks before. So yeah, that is my experience. So I've had so I had some personal experience. That's the one that stands out to me. In it was definitely 6 to 9 months. Plus, that was probably 8 years, 7 years of Ironman, pretty continuous Ironman training without a lot of real rest. Even though my training was not as consistent as I'd often hoped it would be going into a race because of life factors, but, yeah, so that was my experience, and I probably had a couple of athletes that I've coached that we've had that experience. Out of all the races, out of all the tapers, out of all the yeah, it's rare to have that. So, yeah, what was your experience?
Yeah, so my big breakthrough year where I finally like say I did things right, right? For whatever that
Mhm.
means. Like and what you're right might look a little bit different. But I would say that even after I learned how to do things right in a way that works for me, then I
Yeah,
started like helping other athletes do the same or like follow the same. And I would say that in the times where we have not been successful with that, it's largely because the athlete's life did not allow
right,
the training to happen in the months leading up. So it's not really about the taper. And I feel like that's just largely going to be the theme of this whole, like, as we're talking about taper, but like really what we're talking about is like, did you do all the work to earn the taper? And like,
right,
again, I'll go back to what I told the high schoolers, like, we have to have something to taper from.
right,
So
right.
if you haven't done the work, then you're not tapering, you're just resting or freshening up so that you're not carrying fatigue into the race. Yeah, the year it was 2011 was the year that I finally like learned how to and my first Ironman was in 1997. So, we're talking for 14 years I had already been doing Ironman and doing it more in a way of like I was just training as much as I could fit in or whatever. But like I followed in 2011 I followed a very structured, very disciplined build where I spent probably 8 weeks, like not letting my heart rate get above
Mm,
145,
mhm.
150, right? And I couldn't train with groups. I trained like largely alone because I had to slow down so much. I was like rebuilding, my metabolic base, rebuilding this aerobic engine. I was lonely. I was bored. I put in a lot of hours though, like and that
Yeah,
was the whole thing. It was like I put a lot of hours. So when you're training big volume, when all of it is like with your heart rate under 150, and at the time I was in my 30s, so like now it'd probably be under 140, but at the time it was 150s. I was younger. It wasn't hard. It just was time consuming and boring, but it wasn't like hard, right? Because
mhm,
like
mhm,
but again, that was almost like your training to train phase, like where I was developing my capacity. And because I had a lot of time on my hands and I had a lot of patience and I had a lot of discipline, I did all the work where I got more efficient. And then I went into like the training to race phase where, we started doing like more intense efforts, more intense
mhm,
intervals, those built in duration, so sometimes I'd be like 4 by 10 minutes, 4 by 15 minutes on the bike, but even like 4 by 8 minutes on the run types of like where I'm really pushing intensity. And what I found really interesting is that when I did those workouts off of the 8 weeks of high volume, low heart rate work that I did, it
mhm.
was like I was a crushing the intense workouts when I was doing them because they
Yeah,
were scheduled well. I was fit and ready to do them, not just ready to do them, but ready to absorb the work. Right, like after I did it, like I was recovering really quickly and like
mhm.
really surprising myself day to day of like what I could handle. I'm like, this is incredible. Like I was having like some of the best training sessions I'd had, and I'd finish and be like, I feel really, really good. And I would again say that that was a benefit of the 8 weeks I did where I was disciplined, and that part is just really hard to come by. Like, it's if we're looking at, like, why isn't this a more a common thing that people do? And I think that there's largely, like, a patience issue of, like, I wanna see results sooner. I'm not willing to start early enough where I give myself, this giant block of time where I can just put volume in without worrying about
Mhm.
pace or power, how fast I'm getting or whatever. I was just, like, going back to basics. And here's the thing, my volume, because I was so fit, even when I was doing the higher intensity work, like as we got closer to the race. And one thing, a caveat I should probably say is that I was technically training for an Ironman, but I had a half Ironman 3 weeks before. And that formula has worked twice for me now. Like, because it worked again a couple of years later where I had an Ironman and then I scheduled a half Ironman 3 weeks before. I didn't really like I say I didn't even like rest and taper for the, I took 7 days of like lighter work before the half Ironman.
Mhm.
And both times, those are my best ever half Ironmans. And it
Neat.
was like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
what you say is that like all that volume that I did, and then like the volume that I did allowed me to perform the intensity in training that I wanted to do. So I adapted to that all really well. And I also got really used to operating like under this like blanket of fatigue.
Mhm.
Right. So I was at a point where my fitness was high enough that even when I was really tired, I could pull off a super solid session. Right.
Yeah.
Like I was
Yeah.
not failing workouts due to fatigue. And so I really wasn't sure how things were going to go because I was like, honestly, like I'm training really well. Like I was training in a way that I'm like, I feel like I could do an Ironman on any given Saturday and go faster than I've ever gone before. So like, what does a
Yeah.
taper look like in that scenario? And, what we did was basically just, it was only 5 days before the
Mhm.
70.3 that I did. That was a giant breakthrough race where 5 days of pretty drastically lighter load, but still a little bit of intensity in there, right? Like I still got to ramp it
Mhm.
up at times. I still got to do some work. The difference is that when I was doing work, it wasn't like do this work and like rest 30 seconds and then repeat and go again. It was more like do that work, rest an equal amount of
Yeah.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So that you can then like do another interval that is still really high quality. And the difference when you manipulate recovery intervals like that, where you're getting full recovery between interval reps within a workout, then you're not eliciting the same degree of strain during the workout. So you still get kind of like that stimulus of the higher intensity, but with much less strain because the recovery is more full between those
Yeah.
efforts.
Yep.
So like that was probably the biggest thing. And then I went into the race because my main like A race was still 3 weeks away for Ironman. Like I went into the half very much just like, let's just see what happens. Right. Where like I was super fit. I was confident, but not overly confident. I was curious. I was like, let's just see what happens. And I mean, I just absolutely shocked myself for like a 20-minute PR and a 70.3 on like a
That's
crazy hot
amazing.
day. Like
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
insane. And I just felt so good the whole time. Like I was like totally in control and totally making choices. Like I just was
Mhm.
smiling. I was happy. I crossed the finish line. I was like, wow, that was insane. And it wasn't any magic in the 5 days that I did before that. It was the 6 months before that is what led to that. And then, if we're going back to, having an Ironman then 3 weeks later, which again was PR Ironman, and I just did like a reasonable amount of work for 3 weeks. Like I didn't do anything crazy. It was like the vast majority of the work. And I have found this, I'd be curious what your experience is in this too, but for Ironman athletes, I have found that when the biggest chunk of work, this is in an ideal world where the athlete has time to train appropriately, is that if the biggest work is done sort of like 4 to 7 weeks out,
Yeah.
and then a
Yeah.
longer taper. Like, so there was there were times where I resisted a longer taper and I just thought, I don't need to rest that much. And I would read like 5 week taper plans. I'm like, 5 week taper? Like, no way. That's
But
way
it's
too long.
not.
But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's not like 5 weeks of doing
No.
nothing. It's
Right.
more like your biggest, like that 100-mile ride you did with the hour-long run afterward, that was 5 weeks out.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
from there, then you start to lower the volume, especially on running. But yeah, so like that was my experience with it. And it was like it reiterated to me the importance of that base phase, right? And like doing things well. And this is what I'll say. It's really rare that I get to put an athlete through a build like
Yeah.
that.
Really
And
rare.
it's
Yeah.
not because I don't want to,
Yeah.
but it's because like the
Yeah.
athlete, there's so many things that get in the way, right? Like, so the athlete doesn't hire me in time that we have enough time to do the whole build, or the athlete just doesn't have enough time in their world. Like they literally have 12 hours a week to train and that's it. Like we're never going to go above 12 hours a week. Well, then like that
Yeah.
whole low heart rate base phase doesn't hit the same because like you can't do it.
But do it as
Or the
well.
athlete is
Right. Yeah.
just too
Yeah.
impatient and wanting to see the results right now and like doesn't like want to spend the time just patiently making the deposits like early on. And so kind of like without that ideal scenario, it's hard to like go through that build. And so in that case, what we're doing then to elicit your best performance on race day is really just we're freshening you up so that you are able to perform without a blanket of fatigue. But maybe if you didn't have a blanket of fatigue 4 weeks ago, it's not really going to be that much different.
Yeah. Yeah, my comment I think that's amazing. I think I would have loved to have tried your technique there. I think I would have worked, assuming I had a good build, to do a 70.3 and then turn around 3 weeks later and do an Ironman. I think that would have been it almost makes me intrigued if I ever get back into racing.
You're like, "Ooh, I
The
want to try it
only
again."
yeah, the only
Now that I'm 50 and I'm old, it doesn't work the same at all.
That's true, that's true. There is that. We have to take that into consideration, I
Hmm.
think, that the recovery time, even when we're very fit as older masters athletes, it may not work as well at this point. Maybe it's 4 weeks, right? I did do 3 Ironman in 3 months, which is and they were not my breakthrough races, but they were very consistent. They were like 11:30 each one, like across the board, different courses, different. So I'm very steady in my execution there. But I will say, and I never felt like it was too much. I never felt like the training was too much. I never felt that the fatigue was too much. So I know that again, that was sort of my last 3 Ironman. So it was after a decade of doing this, and it was great. It was a ton of fun, and it was just an exploration of like, can I do this? Can I recover and do it again? Can I still enjoy the process? Yes, across the board. I would be very hesitant to apply that technique to really any of the athletes I've worked with. Like I can maybe one or two across the last 5 to 10 years, but I agree. I think most of the time it's real. I don't get the opportunity to take an athlete through that kind of build anymore. And I think a lot of athletes want to, but their lives are the ones I'm working with anymore. It's not a possibility. So we're
Hmm.
more, again, yeah, mitigating, right? Like we're trying to get just enough fitness to be able to have fun and to maybe stretch our boundaries a little bit and maybe have a great race that we're proud of, right? But maybe we're not going to see a half hour PR, an hour PR, right? At the longer distances. What was I going to say on that point? You asked if I remember you asked, in terms of if I did have the opportunity to take an athlete through a little more standard or tradition. Not, I don't even want to say like standard because I don't apply like a standard or a
Yeah.
traditional technique to
It's more
almost
like
any athlete, but
ideal. You would go like
ideal.
ideal.
Right, an
Yeah.
ideal build. Yes, I don't necessarily like the 2-week taper. What I've seen, even for athletes that are carrying a lot of fitness, I have seen like time and time and time again, as soon as a taper starts, even if I don't hard taper them, they get sick. It's like and I don't know, like I try to have a very open communication about, fatigue and like not overdoing it and doing it a little bit, right? Like or stretching it a bit. But I mean, I swear, like I don't know what it is, but if I am doing a more traditional 2-week taper and they have that in their mind, it's like, yep, they get sick. So as we tapers
That happened to me.
with
That
yeah,
personally, I mean, there were several Ironmans that I tried to do with bronchitis, right? That it
and
was
it's
like
like,
I did all the training, and then as soon as I was like done training,
yeah,
I
right.
ended up
Then you're
with,
sick.
that's when the virus comes on. I
So
have some theories around that, like why that happens for
well,
sure.
we see it, even like getting through finals, getting through a big. I mean, it's the body's. I mean, I don't even know if it's. I mean, it's got to be a cortisol response, right? Like even if we think we're managing fatigue, even if we think we're fueling right and getting enough sleep, there is something either cortisol, mental. I don't know, right? But the only time that's happened to me is actually in like finishing my PhD, my dissertation, and finals weeks in college, like big finals weeks. I typically got sick afterwards. I don't think I ever got sick during a taper. I got sick after Ironman races. I think your system's just totally shot, right? If you go to the well, and especially if you're not carrying a lot of fitness, which sometimes I wasn't, but I went to the well anyways, then that flight home was always, yeah, a little,
Yeah.
that's where you pick up the bugs. But I digress a little bit. The illness thing that I've seen, and I think you've seen it too, either with yourself or with athletes, what I try to do now, if the athletes open to it because sometimes there is this perception of like, well, I need this, right? Like I need 2 weeks, right? Is to do that big hard, like the end of the big hard volume block, maybe with some race intensity in there. Yeah, 4 to 5, maybe even 6 weeks out, and then rest pretty hard for about a week, and then reintroduce a little bit of race specificity, right? I call it like it's not really a reverse taper. I mean, it's like a ramp down in some ways,
Yeah. Well, it's a
and that
rest early and then you kind of
rest
ramp
early,
up
yeah.
a little bit. So you're kind of
Right.
like, if the athlete tends to perform well when they're on a roll, right?
Right,
Which
right.
like fitter
Yeah,
athletes really can do. Be like, I'm on a roll, like I'm doing the thing, and like that can be really good. So you take like a big rest like 4 or 5 weeks out,
5
like rest for a week or so, and then start ramping back up a little bit, and then you just sort of rest into the race, and like that is a
Yeah,
that's a strategy that can work really well, sort of depending on the athlete
yeah.
and
Yeah, and sometimes I will still see athletes get sick that week, that we rest hard, even though we're well out from the race, like there's no stress, and they still get sick. But when you have 4 to 5 weeks then before the race, you again, it's never great to get sick in a race build. You're probably gonna tap the strain on the body will be higher even from a not training load, which is not great, right? It's from your body trying to recover from a bug, but you can usually feel good by race day. Whereas sometimes 2 weeks when you're in sick during taper, it doesn't always work out. A lot of times you just feel overly fatigued. You've stripped too much. Well, you're not really rested because your body's been fighting this bug. So you're well rested from a physical like standpoint, but from a fatigue standpoint, you might actually not be because you're trying to recover from this illness. So yeah, I'm not a big fan really of like what most the traditional 2 weeks because I feel like either for some of my masters athletes it's actually not enough rest. So sometimes I even like to taper them in like 3 weeks and we dabble in a little bit of work because they still have shown up to races too much fatigue. And it's sometimes hard to tell like when they're feeling fatigue, is it because they haven't done enough work or they or they're not recovered. And again, that will sometimes be determined by the build before then. Like, it's if you got an athlete that's 65, maybe even older, and they're hitting their sessions and they're not reporting an extensive amount of fatigue during that build, but yet they show up to race day still fatigued. In my mind, that's usually not enough rest in that, sort of 2 week taper period to elicit the super compensation then. But it's sometimes tough to figure out, right? Like, or did we rest too hard and not peppering enough so that then the race, they weren't able to like get their legs going and feel good, neuromuscularly feel good.
hmm
Yeah. So
hmm
it's,
yeah, like because there are
yeah,
athletes that are
yeah,
like afraid of doing intensity like the week
yep,
before the race, and I would say
right.
that tends to be athletes who are less experienced,
Yes. Yeah.
right, tend to be more afraid, or like they'll see a workout that's like mostly easy, but it has some like bursts or some peppy bits like thrown in, like do 3 times 45 seconds, like burst to above race effort or whatever. And that can look like such a minor thing that you'd be like, I'm just going easy. Like, and you would
Right.
almost just forget to like even
Right.
include those little bursts of effort in there, and not realizing how important those efforts actually are for like the physiology that we're trying to like elicit out of you. It's like, don't skip the strides.
Right.
Like,
Right.
keep doing the
I
strides.
agree. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, your point about being sick is an interesting one. I had that when I first got out of college, I was a classroom teacher.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there was a pattern that
Yeah.
I noticed, that I would get sick every Christmas break, every spring break, and the first week of every summer break, I spent sick. And that happened like multiple years in a row. And it was
Hmm.
like, what is happening? Like, I would not get sick in a way that, I would have to miss work. But like the day that spring break started, I'd be like, oh, there it is, my scratchy throat. Here I go getting sick again. And what I realized is like, okay, here's the thing, there has to be a mental component to that.
Yeah. There has
Has
to
to
be.
be.
There
Like
has to be.
the only way that that pattern works out is that like there's a mental component to it. And I'm thinking, "Oh, okay, so I think what it is something that like inside us that we know like we cannot get sick. We cannot let our guard
Yeah.
down. So when there's something important happening, so whether that's like my job is really important right now, I have to get this work done, I have to do this thing, I don't have time to get sick, so you won't get sick. I have to get this big training in, right?
Hmm.
So like you
Hmm.
can train like a monster for 6 weeks at a time and I can't get sick. But then there's like this mental component to like, I
Letting
can
your guard
rest
down.
now,
Yeah.
right? Like I
Yeah.
can rest now. So it's spring break. I can rest now. I finished my last 100-mile ride before my taper. Like now, like, before my Ironman, I can rest now. And what I realized is that like, as soon as I had it in my head that like, I can rest now, it was like my
Hmm.
body would go into repair mode. It would be like,
Yeah.
great. Oh, we've been wanting to do these repairs. I mean, it's kind of like, here's the analogy. I
Yeah.
live in Hawaii. It has been raining for like a month straight.
Yeah.
And so it's like we can't do a lot of repair work outside because it's just
It's
like the
just
stress, it just keeps coming, right? The rain keeps coming, it keeps coming. So it's like to go out and like try to repair right now would just basically be a waste of time
yeah.
because you cannot repair when you're still like under
On the
stress. And so it's
deluge,
like
yeah.
when we lift the stress up, then it's like, oh, okay, hey, let's go clean all this up. And I think our bodies go through a similar process. We're like, let's go clean up all this mess. Like, we need to rebuild. Like, she's been breaking us down for 6 weeks straight now. We need to rebuild. And like, in that process, it's like your immune system is like, oh, yeah, like we need to do some work here too. Like, we got to beat these viruses and then trying to like come on or whatever. But it's like, as soon as you decide mentally that this is your time to rest, your body goes into repair mode. And like, sometimes the repair can be like really serious. I think then that the way to mitigate that, right? Like, so then, because like once I realized that pattern, it's like, okay, got it. I see the pattern, but I still want to change the pattern. Like, just because you see a pattern doesn't mean like, oh, we have to live with that forever.
Right.
So, like,
Right.
what can we do then to mitigate that and so that we don't get sick ahead of time? I think a couple things. The first thing is to be taking little mini micro breaks
Mhm.
like in the middle, take 2 days really easy here and there so that your body has an ability to recover itself before it has to do like major repairs. Right. So
Mhm.
I'm going to do it's like you're doing a little bit at a time. So whether that's like a rest day every week, a rest day every other week, 2 rest days every other week, 2 rest days every third week, like pick the thing that works for you and like your scenario. But like don't try to be a superhero and go for 6 weeks straight without really allowing yourself some real recovery like in there. Like that will help prevent like the massive like recovery job that needs to be done, when you like decide that like, okay, here's my break, I get to rest now. And then the other thing would be like, and this is probably what you did when you said you never really got sick like right before an Ironman. I did a lot, and I will tell you that like the mental component to that, like I would finish my last 100-mile ride and I would do like the 4 mile runoff or like whatever I was doing at the time, and I'd be like, fun, right? But the race is still 2 weeks out, and like I get sick the next day. It's so frustrating to like put in all that work and then get sick the next day. And so after enough experiences doing that, like the next time I did it, I was like, okay, I need to not tell myself that I'm done. Right. So
Mhm.
like I'm going to do the last hard. So I didn't really change the training that much, but what I changed was my mental approach to it, where like
Mhm.
I did not give myself like mental permission to be done with
Mhm.
training. Instead, it was
Mhm.
like there's still some very important training sessions that I have coming up. So while there's more like rest and recovery built into the next couple of weeks, Wednesday's still a really key day. Saturday's another key day. I have that key swim on Tuesday. I would plan out these like key workouts and
Mhm.
remind myself that I'm not done. That works for me.
Yeah.
And now when I'm writing taper resting workouts for athletes, I'll remind them, especially if I know they're ones that like have a tendency to get sick in that
Yeah.
time. Like, do
Yeah.
not let your guard down. You are not done with training yet. Like that was the last big
Right.
workout, but you still have a couple more key ones coming up. So keep those in the back of your mind that we're still going to perform on Wednesday
Yeah.
or Tuesday or whatever the day is.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that those two things have helped me and athletes that I am working with like get to the start line healthy so that
Yeah.
they can then
That's good
perform.
advice. Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah. I think the only I tended to not enjoy taper. So I'm one of those
Hmm.
weird athletes. I love to train. I love to train hard. I know you do
Yeah,
too. So it's not
same.
like saying uh I didn't really like taper. I didn't like I like to feel fatigue. Even
I
now,
did too.
right? Like even
Hmm.
like going for a
Yeah.
big if my dogs are a
Hmm.
little like, oh, like they can't go big, for a big hike. I'm like, oh man, I have to settle or work forces me to only do a moderate hike. Like, I don't know. I love to train. I didn't like taper. I like to carry fatigue. And I think, if anything, the 3 Ironmans in 3 months, like, yeah, I mean, I'm somebody that I didn't get injured. I get some niggles now and again, now that I'm not training at such a high volume, which I think also speaks to the benefits of training at a high volume to be very durable, to be able to do the things you want to do. But yeah, I didn't get injured. I didn't overdo it. And I also trained a lot by math, right? Like I did intensity, but I had a lot of training at very low intensity. And so I also think there's some health benefits to having that huge base, right? In that I'm not trying to trying to think about like my mindset of why I didn't get sick. And maybe it was always that, I just loved the training. I didn't like to taper. And the race was I'm trying to think of like how many times did I get sick after races, and I don't, I mean, like maybe one or two. I also had this mindset of like, what's the next thing? And so
Mhm.
I didn't put as much pressure, I don't think. I'm trying to put myself back in my shoes, 10 years ago, of like how I was managing it. But I know it was a lifestyle, I think. And so there's always another race. And what I see a lot for some athletes is like they're training for the race, right? To perform at the race instead of like, I am training to get the most out of myself. And this is another stepping point. And yes, I want to do well. I care about the race, but it's not like the end all be all. And so I do think that when athletes put a lot of pressure on themselves to perform at this race because of XYZ, right? Then there's again that mental component of like, or when they're trying to train for this block to perform well at this race, and now this block is done, so now I can rest, right? It is exactly like finals week, right? We're ending the school season. Now I can let my guard down, right? But you're right. Like I think even for those athletes that put a lot of pressure on themselves for that race, you have to continue to remind yourself if you're self-coached or yeah, if you're a coach out there listening, like remind your athletes that you're not done, right? Like now it's time to rest, strip the fatigue and sharpen yourself up so that you can perform well, at this big
Mhm.
race. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm trying to I don't know. That's what I think that's kind of where I know whenever I almost always had another race on the calendar too back in the day, right? Like
Mhm.
had won an Ironman and then, usually 6 months because they sold out. Like you had to sometimes sign up a year in advance. They don't sell
Yep.
out anymore. So, it was like this was never the end all be all. Yeah, I cared about it, but anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And I know and I've messed up tapers. I'm not proud to admit it, but like I will be
Mhm.
honest, I've messed up tapers for athletes, not intentionally, right? But by them having this beautiful build, and I will say this is athletes that maybe are kind of on the type A spectrum that wouldn't always communicate how tired they were. And then they show up to race and it was just like they didn't even perform at the level that we thought that they were able to. Right.
Mhm.
Now, there's also a
Mhm.
fueling component that often plays rears ugly head, right, in Ironman racing. And so, and that I think in this particular case, this athlete I'm thinking of also really struggled with fueling. And so I think early on we didn't recognize how much fueling was playing a role and we kind of
Yeah.
blamed it on the taper. Now thinking back, actually it might not have been the taper. It might have been that they just were inadequately
Yeah.
fueling. So
Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah.
I take that back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
yeah.
had a similar one that I didn't know. She actually had an eating disorder. And
Mm,
I didn't know she's a remote athlete, so like
yeah.
I wasn't
Yeah.
working with her in person and everything was online. And like, when you're doing like a, 60 to 90-minute training session, like those went well. And even her longer training sessions, like I mean, I would feel like they would go well. And every time we would get into a race and she would vastly underperform to what like I thought she
Which
should have
yeah.
done. And like it killed me. It was like I was
Yeah.
scratching my brain, because like I care. I want my athletes to do well,
Yeah.
like when you train them, like I'm emotionally invested in your performance and like I want the best for you, especially when it's like you're green box, green box, green box, like you're
Right.
doing
Right.
all the work,
All
you're
the
super type A, doing all the thing. And it's like I feel largely invested in your performance when you're doing all the things I'm
right.
asking you to do. So when the underperformance happens on the day, I'm like, man, like what is that? And
What is
yeah,
that?
it
Yeah.
was like later when we had like a really honest, it was years later actually, is that like after I don't know, like the third time it happened, like I had a
Yeah.
hard heart with her. I'm like, I feel like I don't know where else to go with you. And so it's not that I don't want to help you, but I feel like I've done everything that I know how to do. And like I don't know if like you might need to find another coach. And like and it's not that I don't want to coach you, but like I've used all the tricks that I have in my book to help you, and like what we're doing is not working and I don't know what else to do about it and I want you to perform. So like I don't know, like maybe another coach is right for you, and I want to be friends, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it, like
Right. Right.
it was genuinely like out of the like my desire for her to do well was like maybe try something else because like maybe somebody knows something I don't know. And then it was years later when she went with another coach, didn't, like
Yeah.
times just
Yeah.
stayed what they were. And I would watch her racing, like she still hasn't figured it out. And then like years later, we were talking on the phone and she told me about her eating disorder. I'm like, there you
So, yeah.
go. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
that was
It's
it. And so it was like, and that's hard for a coach to be like, I was really beating myself up, like that
yeah.
I'm doing this athlete a disservice. And what it was is like the athlete wasn't eating. And I mean, to be fair, at that time, what I wasn't doing was like, tell me exactly how much you're
Right.
feeling, or I mean,
Yeah.
'cause she wasn't lying to me, but like I just wasn't as on top of asking those
Yeah.
questions as I
Same.
could have been.
Yeah.
The other way that I've seen athletes screw up tapers is in going above and beyond
Yeah.
the recommended intensity
Yeah.
in like the say the 10 days before the race. Like when you start resting, you start to freshen up, you start to feel really good. And then you'll go out and like you'll tell an athlete to, like progress this run down to this pace or whatever, or like, hit these 4 times 4 minute intervals at a certain level. They'll take their threshold workout and make it a VO2 max workout because
Yep.
like they just felt so good. Coach, I just
Right.
felt amazing. Right. And the first couple times, like when I was an early coach, like a newer coach, when an athlete would do that, I'd be like, wow, like we're in for a great race. Like, look how fast you're going. Like
And
four
then
days out, like you did
yeah.
that workout where you were just absolutely killing it. And like, you're totally ready. This is great. And then they go into the race and it's like they were flat or like they like didn't feel as good. And I'm like racking my head going like, what's going on there?
Yeah,
And then
went
you
too hard.
realize
Yeah.
that like,
Yeah.
oh, you left your race out on the training day, 4 days before because you just felt so good. And even though like I specifically said, like, here's the pace to go. Now I write the wording is no faster. I don't care how
Yeah.
good you feel. Do not go faster than this pace.
Yeah.
Like it's very
Yeah.
clear, because like you can absolutely, especially with running. So like that was
Yes.
like the
Yeah.
last part. So we're going to keep this podcast on the shorter side. So we're going to finish this
Yeah.
up here soon. But like the one other point I want to make about tapering, and I would be curious to see if you have the same philosophy here. I bet you do. But like the first thing that I taper off with athletes I work with is the run. So
Yes.
like the longest, hardest runs are done weeks out and the run starts tapering off first,
Mhm.
where like we're not, and it's because hard run intervals are so taxing, they can leave you drained for way longer than you think
Yeah.
they will, right? You can
Yeah.
absolutely leave your marathon out on, a training day 2 or 3 weeks, even 3 weeks out. If you
Yeah,
did
I would
a
say.
run that was long enough and hard enough, 3 weeks out, say it was like a race simulation kind of run where you ran, 10 miles at marathon pace or something, and you were like, "Ah, that was great. That was it was perfect." And then you get out and 3 weeks later, you can't repeat it again. You're like, I think you
Mhm.
actually left your marathon like out there on the training memories. So I would say we taper the run off first. We're very careful with run intensity and the duration of intensity, like how long you're holding those efforts. And so making sure that you're not overdoing the run no matter how good you feel. Save
Yep.
it. Then the next thing that gets tapered off is your bike volume, and bike intensity and taking intensity just up to maybe like if you're going to go above threshold, keeping those efforts on the shorter side, like what you're not going to do is like, 8 minutes above threshold, right? Where
Right.
you're getting to the point where you're like panting, breathing, you're working really hard and starting to even get to the point where you're failing. Like that's not a taper workout, right? Like that was a
Right.
VO2 max workout that you should have been doing months ago. And then what's interesting, and I'd be curious, maybe like your theory on swimming is different than mine, but like coming from a swimming background, for me, swimming was absolutely the last thing that I would taper. And I would taper it only really just in volume, but I would actually maybe even increase the frequency of swimming. So, like, say in this scenario that you have an athlete that is only swimming like 3 times a week because like they've been focused on bike and run. And then when we get into the 2 weeks leading up to the race, where maybe I'm shortening up the runs are becoming less intense, less stressful overall. I shorten up the bikes a little bit. I might create a space if there's a possibility to do it to put the fourth swim in. Right. So
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
you were usually just swimming 3 times, but I'm actually going to add a swim. Each one won't be really long. You know what I mean? Like they won't be like crazy long, but so swimming like say 2,500 4 times a week instead of 3K 3 times a week is a really nice way to taper off the swim. Yeah, even for some, like, depending on how good the swimmer is, like, if it's somebody who comes from, like, a solid swimming background and the swim is therefore not very fatiguing for them, so, like, I would have fallen into this category when I was Ironman training, but not everybody does.
No.
But
Yeah.
if you have a swimming background, you don't really have to taper your swim much off at all. Like, you
Yeah.
could swim pretty solid the day before and, like, still, like, call it good, like, the swim and the difference there and how do you know? Like, how did we decide? We say it's for some athletes and not for others. Like, well, how taxing is the swim for you? Right. So, like, if your swim fitness is really high and a 3K swim is something you could do in your sleep and you're not going to it doesn't make you tired, then like that's fine for you. Right. Versus the other athlete who learned how to swim when they were 27, right. And have only been swimming for 6 years. Like swimming is still really tiring for them. So like a 3K swim might bring on a level of fatigue that would be too much and it would impair their race. So those are the kinds of things that like as coaches we're taking into account when we're deciding like what your particular taper looks like, because the big picture goal is making sure that whatever work you're doing is not eliciting any fatigue in a way that is going to cause or require excess recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really depends. So for me, if I could get athletes to increase their swim, like again, not volume, but the frequency, I would absolutely prescribe it. A lot of times I don't get that flexibility in the athlete's
Hmm.
schedule, sadly. I was going to say, yeah, when I was performing well at Ironman, I was swimming 5 times a week, sometimes six.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think too often I would swim 7 days a week, but yeah, it was a huge component, even though I'm a late onset swimmer. I mean, I grew up on a river, so I swam, but I didn't swim, right, like, from competitively. I knew how to swim. I'm a what does, Lionel say? He's an adult onset swimmer, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh, but and when I did do the 3 Ironmans in 3 months, I swam a ton, an absolute ton. Swimming is so great to maintain your baseline fitness, less stress on your body. So I basically, when I was doing those, the back-to-back Ironmans, and they were within what, there was like 3 weeks, and then maybe 4 weeks, I think. So it was based a lot of swimming, like swimming almost every day, and biking, and then running. I don't think I ran for a week at least after each Ironman, maybe
Hmm.
two, and then they were just sprinkled in. I think the longest run I would have done between those Ironmans was maybe an hour and 15, maybe.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
then, swimming a lot, and swimming fairly like 3,000 yards, or meters, well, maybe not meters, 2,500 meters, at a time with some intensity. Well, maybe not intensity right away, but that intensity brought back in fairly quickly. Then biking usually pretty easy for a week, and then biking, with a little bit more, race intensity. And then if I felt good, into a little bit of work, but not, with a ton of rest. So never too taxing on the body. So yeah, absolutely agree. Like if I can get the athlete to increase their swim frequency and it's not taxing for them, I love to do that. Same though, yeah, bringing the run down. Like if I'm going to have them do an hour run off a big ride, that's usually 3 to 4 weeks out, regardless. And sometimes I can't do the taper I want because of their schedule, right? Like it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
got to travel, right? And I'm like, okay,
Well, oh
well, we
my
just,
gosh, to travel into the race, we cannot get into that now.
yeah, no,
That's
too
another
much.
whole another thing. Like
Yeah,
the
too much. Can
travel
I
into
go
the
to,
race.
yeah, can I fly across the world 2 weeks? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then biking kind of comes down. Yeah, again, and I see it all the time as well with athletes feeling really good in the decreased volume and going too hard. And you even see this out, right, when you're out at races, people still like slamming intervals and like
Hmm.
training right up till race day. And it's like, in theory, it depends on the age, it depends on the athlete, but you cannot build fitness usually within a 2-week window, right? So what you're doing really is trying to strip fatigue, and stay sharp. And so if you're doing work in that kind of uh, 2-week window, and it might vary, right? Some athletes it's 3, for some athletes maybe it's a week. We don't really know. Kind of depends on how fast they recover and what their life stress is. But it's most of the scientific results and evidence suggest that like within that 2-week window, you're not actually going to build the fitness for the race. Now you can damage the race performance by going too hard, right? In that kind of 2-week, 3-week window. So
Maybe we'll and let's end it with this. It's better to be, what is it, 10% undertrained than
yeah,
2% overtrained.
yes,
Like if like in the week or 2 or 10 days, whatever like time period you've had, you're likely to be better off choosing
under,
less
yeah,
than choosing more in that time frame. But again, months out, you're better off probably choosing more than choosing less. And so like
yeah,
it's all
yeah,
about timing. So
it
there's a
is.
lot of nuance to it. So hopefully we didn't confuse people today and like we helped make it sort of clear. But if you have any
Yeah.
questions, please reach out.
Yeah, I was gonna
Happy to
say the
answer
exact
any.
same thing. Yeah, like drop us an email or, let us know if you have questions. We'd be, I'm sure, both happy to help. So,
Yeah.
as always,
Cool.
thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
We
Take care,
will,
Mickey.
yeah, we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah. Bye.